I mean, I know your life has really been in danger, but was there ever a time where you said, "Man, this ain't for me," or was there ever a time where you thought that sort of the heat just got too intense?
That never happened in the second half of my career when I started doing these long-term undercover infiltrations, because I had gotten so comfortable. Those situations happened when I was in that period I told you about, when I was kind of earning my way. When I was doing the deals in the alleyway, right? And when I had dudes stick guns in my faces a couple times, right, during a deal, and they'd stick the gun in your face, or you cop, or whatever it was, or they were just there to rip you, right? They knew you were showing up with money. They had no intention of selling you that gun.
Right.
They were just going to keep the gun and rip you. Those times was when I had some doubt, right? When you're looking down the barrel, right? And you know this kid probably isn't going to shoot you because he really does. He wants to make some money and keep making money, but they might.
Brother, thank you for doing this, man.
Man,
Thank you
my
for doing
honor,
this.
brother.
Oh man, it's my honor. And I met you down in South Carolina, at one of Sid's events. Sid's events are something, man. It's like, yeah. What do you love about him?
So, he gets this group of guys together, men and women, who have these incredible backgrounds and experiences. And you never know who you're talking to.
That's right.
And what their background might be. And then you find out, wow, this girl did that or this guy did that. And it's just an amazing collection of people. And I love to hear their stories.
Me too, man. And it's crazy because, it's like all from, just titans of the law enforcement community and special forces community and like people who've been through. But one thing is I just find like everybody's so humble. So look, man, I'm a huge admirer of yours. Like it was so cool to meet you that day and I immediately connected to you and we talked a little bit about your family and you gave me your book, which I loved, and I loved the inscription that you wrote on there. And in the book you said something that really struck me. You just talked about like in a world of tough guys, in a world of like bad criminals, in a world that you know extraordinarily well, it's really not about being the toughest guy in the room. It's about understanding human nature.
Absolutely.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, if you walk into a room, all right, and you're the kind of person that people just naturally want to be around, people want to listen to you, like they want to find out what's this guy's hustle, what's he all about, then you have the ability to be a good undercover. It is not about getting earrings and growing your hair long and lifting weights and being a tough guy, because eventually, these guys we're working on, they're smart guys.
Yeah.
I mean, they're sharp.
Yeah.
They're street smart, and they know what they're doing. There's a reason why they're still out there, right? And they will see through you if you come in as a tough guy.
Yeah.
And, I have my example of that is my first biker case I did. So I got the call back in 1999 to do a case on the Outlaws motorcycle.
And where was this?
In Atlanta, Georgia.
Uh-huh.
And I learned later that the only reason I got that call was because I was the only other agent in the Atlanta Field Division that had a motorcycle license on my undercover license. It wasn't because of any skill or anything I had. So the story was there was a ATF agent who was already undercover with these guys, and his partner was a task force agent with the sheriff's department. And as they started getting embedded and it started getting deep, and the Outlaws had asked them to go to Bike Week in Daytona with them, that the sheriff's department pulled their guy. They said, listen, we didn't sign up for all this. And they pulled their guy. So he needed a partner. And I got the call. And the only reason I had a motorcycle license on my undercover license was because when I was 18 years old, I had a Yamaha Virago for like 6 months. Right? And I didn't know how to ride a Harley. I'd never ridden a Harley. I knew nothing about outlaw bikers.
Really?
Nothing. So, and I remember driving from Savannah up to Atlanta, calling my buddy who did ride Harleys up north and saying, hey, bro, on a Harley, is it when you shift, is it one down and then four? He was like, dude, what are you getting yourself into, man? And so I get there, and there was 2 informants and the ATF undercover guy. And, the informants were big biker dudes. And they give me this chopper, right? It was a hardtail, raked out chopper. And bro, I didn't know anything, let alone how to start this thing. So right off the bat, they're like, hey, follow us. We're going to the clubhouse. This is my first day. So it was nighttime. It was kind of misting. It's North Georgia mountains. And they take off, and all I'm seeing is taillights. I'm trying to keep up. And I go into a turn. I dump the bike.
Oh,
I slide about 50 yards into a ditch. And, I mean, I'm all, road cut up and all that.
have you ever dropped a bike before?
No, I'd only ridden a bike for a couple months.
Holy.
So by the time they figured out I wasn't behind them and they came back, the big informant who never liked me, he looks at me and he looks at the undercover guy and he says, "You want us to take this mother into the Outlaws clubhouse? He can't even ride a fucking motorcycle."
Oh, wow.
So when I heard that, I was like, you know what? Nah. I picked my shit up and I bent the mirrors back and, they helped me get the bike out of the ditch. And I said, let's go. So at least I won their respect.
Yeah.
Even though all I wanted to do was go home.
Yeah, of course.
So anyway, we get to this clubhouse, and I don't know if you've ever been in a one percenter clubhouse, but they're very intimidating.
Yep.
Right. I had never seen anything like it. And again, I knew nothing about
Can
it.
you explain why they're intimidating?
So you got a bunch of big, scary looking dudes who are bad guys. The place is dirty. It's dark. There's just a general feeling of evil about it. That's how it was for me. Just, I felt like, man, bad things have definitely happened in this place, and are probably going to happen again.
Yeah.
So when we went in there, and I had no coaching or training or anything, I stood there against the wall, okay, for about 45 minutes. I didn't say a word. I just stood there. And I watched these guys, and I watched how they carried themselves and how they interacted. And I could tell right away who the president was by the way they were talking to him, and acting with him. So after about 45 minutes, I walked up to the president and I introduced myself and I called him sir. I said, sir, I don't know anything about your culture and I don't know anything about your rules. And I certainly don't want to offend you or anyone else. I just want to learn. I want to become one of you someday. And I want you to teach me. I want to learn. So I kind of appealed to his ego.
Yeah, sure.
And he saw this big gorilla that he could mold.
Yeah.
And he loved that. And I became his favorite guy. He took
Wow.
me under his wing, which made that informant hate me even more.
How about the
after
other
that.
agent? Or the guy from the sheriff's department?
So he was out.
Okay, he was gone.
The other
Okay.
agent was in. And so that kind of made everything easier for me in that case because this guy had taken me under his wing. And now if I had gone in there and acted like a tough guy right off the bat, they would have sniffed me out right away.
Yeah.
There's no way I was pulling the wool over their eyes. So that was my first lesson in working undercover, how to carry myself. Don't go in there as a tough guy. Don't go in there pounding your chest because they're going to sniff you out or they're going to call your bluff.
Yeah. Just talk a little bit about kind of how you came up and what made you sort of make the decision in the first place to law enforcement and how the ATF kind of came into your life.
Yeah, I came up totally normal, with a good Italian family, playing sports. And, I went to college and I had no direction in my life.
Did you play football?
I played football. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Lafayette College, Division I AA powerhouse.
Yep.
And so when I got out of college, I was useless, right? I had a degree in business and economics with like a 2.1 Hume and no direction in my life. So I took a job at a bank making $8 an hour in a room with no windows, putting computer printouts into files. And I just got a phone call one day from a guy I played ball with. He was down in the Bronx. He said, "You sound miserable." He goes, come on down and visit. So I went down there to visit him. And I didn't even know he had a brother. And so we're sitting on the stoop and this guy pulls up in a Corvette and he gets out and he's the coolest looking mother I've ever seen in my life. Back then, remember, this is Miami Vice days, right? He had the kind of fan back, long hair, and he's wearing an open shirt, and he had a Beretta 92F stuck in his waistband there. And I'm looking, I'm like, man, this is a cool dude, man.
Yeah.
Right? And he walks in, and it turns out he was a DEA agent. He had just gotten back from Peru, I believe, and he was working some undercover. And we sat down, we had a beer, and he talked to me for about 30 minutes about what he did. And it was like the skies opened up. And I found my direction right then. I wanted to be an undercover agent.
What was it specifically? I mean, besides him just looking like a cool mother, was there anything that he said? Was there anything that made you think I could do this well?
So it was the concept. It was the concept he talked about of the game. So it's kind of your skill against their skill, right? If you're better than them, they're going to prison, right? If they're better than you, they're going to sniff you out, right? Things might end bad for you, or you're just going to have to walk. But it was that concept of the challenge and of the game, right? To see, who's got better skill, and in the end, if you win, right, you've done something good, right? You've taken a violent, bad person off the street, someone who's putting, guns out on the street, or, large quantities of dangerous drugs or whatever it is. So I loved that it was kind of almost a sport, right?
Yeah.
It's a,
Especially at a time you're working at a bank and you don't have those stakes, and you're just that college football player, everything's kind of on the line, living fully.
Yep.
And then you're in this where it's just kind of getting stale. You knew that wasn't for you.
Dude, I mean, thinking about like doing that for the rest of my life was miserable.
Yeah.
So when I heard about this, and I could just see it in his eyes when he was talking to me, like the passion, and I found that, and I said, man, this is what I want to do. I didn't want to be a uniformed cop. Law enforcement was never even on my radar, but the thought of being an undercover agent, it just appealed to me. And that was it. And as you know, you don't just become an undercover agent, right? You pay your dues, and from that point, by the time I was able to get hired and work through, it was probably 8 years before I started actually working undercover. But once I did, that was it.
I have a guy who's really, really close to music, career undercover guy down in Shreveport, Louisiana, a guy named Carl Townley, who's just we've gotten enormously close over the past 12 years. And one thing he always talks about is sort of like this fine line. He always says, like, look, man, if I didn't become a cop, I would have been a criminal. He was like, and one thing that he always talks about is that, like, it's one word for it is maybe empathy, one word for it is maybe respect, but that you see people just because they're on the other side of the field, you see people and you see the situation that they came up in, and you actually start feeling for them and you start caring about them, and I really we'll talk about that eventually, about like sort of betrayal and what that feels like for you. But why did you know you'd be good at it?
I always had that hustler in me, that hustle. Whether it was just trying to make extra money or whatever it was, I was good at it. I was good at talking to people. I was good at going into a bar. And this is something I've always said, and it's super corny, but it really is true. If you have game, if you're that guy who can go into a bar and you're not like some Brad Pitt looking dude, and you can pull the hottest chick out of that bar,
sure,
you're going to be good at undercover. You have some natural game.
Yeah.
I could bring my crew in here of guys, and none of them look like Brad Pitt. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And they would sit here and it would look like, prison just got out.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, all these guys, they're phenomenal skills. First thing you'll notice about them is that, wow, these are really smart guys. Like after you get past what they look like, these guys are really smart. And then you see their game. These guys got game. And those guys, in their younger days were always guys who could pull the hottest chick out of a bar, even though they weren't the best looking dude in that bar.
Sure.
They knew what to say.
Game? Like, what, in your words, what is game?
Knowing what to say, when to say it, knowing what not to say.
Yeah.
Right? That's game. It's like selling a car.
Yeah.
Right? That person wants to buy the car, right? But they want the best price. There's all these factors you got to put in. So you have to know what to say to them, when to say it, and how to get that money out of their pocket.
Yeah.
How to make a sale.
Sure.
That's game, man. And that's what you're doing working undercover. You're just making a sale. I'm selling you my load of my hustle. I'm selling it to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you can do that, you can be a successful undercover agent, man.
So tell me about that journey then. Like, what you said, it was 8 years?
8 years.
And was there ever a time where the focus wasn't that? Was there ever a time where you wavered and said, hey, maybe I want to do something else instead? Or were you dead set on it from the beginning?
I was so dead set. I started out in LA and I was in some gang units and I was working with LAPD in the Rampart division. We were kicking doors in, and that was the action part, right? This was during the riots. The greatest time to be a law enforcement officer was in Los Angeles in the early 90s.
Why is that?
It was off the charts. The gang situation was so bad. Like all the Central American gangs had come in to LA, and our own gangs, they didn't know what to make of it. Even the Bloods and the Crips, they were seeing a level of violence that even they weren't used to, because the MS-13, these guys, they were coming in, they were chopping people's heads off. They were introducing this level of violence that we weren't accustomed to. The gangs weren't accustomed to it. And it was just wide open. So it, and it all, LA was kind of the epicenter, of where this all started. And it was during the early 90s. And we were out there on the streets during this time. And I loved it. I loved that work.
What did you love about it?
I love the action. I love the feeling when you took a real bad guy off the street, right?
Sure.
When this guy, it said MS-13 on his forehead and, he had the teardrops and he's cutting people's heads off and you just took him off the street. How many lives did you just save? Right? There's no way of knowing. And I love that feeling. I also loved, it was very interesting because I started out as an INS agent, which is now an ICE agent. And so what they did for your first 6 months is they put you on the release line at LA County Jail to interview every inmate on the release line, every foreign-born inmate. So in LA County Jail at that time, that was probably 80% of the inmates were foreign-born.
Sure.
So, and your job was to determine alienage and deportability and slap a detainer on them, okay? But, so I would be interviewing guys who had gotten locked up. Some guy from Mexico who got locked up on a DUI. And then I'd be interviewing some, gangbanger from El Salvador who killed 10 people, right? But what I was doing was most guys and girls would want to get the interview done, slap the detainer on and move on.
Do the job.
I was fascinated by these guys.
Yeah.
Not the DUI guy.
Yeah.
But the MS-13 guy who had grown up like on a dirt floor in some shack outside of San Salvador. Somehow he ended up in LA and he's chopping some guy's testicles off and shoving them in his mouth, right? For the gang. And I would ask him, tell me about this journey. How did you get from that little boy in San Salvador, to what you're doing right now, here in Los Angeles? And, talk to me. And when these guys saw that I was genuinely interested in their story, they talked.
Wow.
And
what do you think? What was that genuine interest? Where'd that come from?
So it was just a fascination of, we all come from somewhere and all of us, right? We're all born and at some point a mama held us and it would fascinate me that, this guy from such simple backgrounds, a lot of them were out in the jungle and out in the sticks, in these Central American countries. You're in East LA, right? And you're doing some terrible things. Like how did that happen? Like what is your story, man? And a lot of the times it was because, the gangs had their families back there and they had to do their bidding, right? So there was more to it.
Sure.
But what I started doing was I would relay this information to our gang unit. And these guys saw, they were like, hey, this new Jack, he's on the job, man. He gets it. He's, so that's how I was able to get into working gangs and get into that gang unit, which I enjoyed again, but I knew in the end, it was undercover work.
But I imagine in that case, some of my friends, that we've had on the show and friends of the show and guys I've been friends with a long time, guys from Newton Division down in South Central, and they were in Crash Unit, and some guys in Rampart. Maybe you even know some of these guys, but all of them talk about those days sort of the way that you do in the 90s. But I imagine during that time you came in contact with like some real violence, and not just hearing somebody tell you the story, but you're seeing it firsthand and it's in your face. What was your kind of history, with violence? And when you encountered it on that level and to that scale, did it make you take pause? How did it make you feel? Did it scare you? Did it ignite sort of more curiosity? Or I know some guys, it's like, I grew up boxing and it's like we always say, you see guys hitting the bag all day, but then you get in the ring, you get hit, and it's like you go one of two ways. Like how was that for you?
So I found it fascinating. I really did. I was, I played sports. I was a terrible boxer. I couldn't get out of the way of a punch to save my life, right? And, football and all that. And I got into jujitsu and all that. But I was accustomed to sports violence, which is a whole nother world from street violence. Yeah. And, I had never been introduced to any of this.
Sure.
Right. And now I'm out here in LA, I'm in my early 20s, and, they're hacking each other. I mean, body parts are coming off. Literally, that's what we were seeing. And like you said, you're going to react one of two ways when you see that kind of violence, right? And to me, I was fascinated by it. I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to lock up these guys because, I truly believe there's no place for that on our streets, man, right? There's no place for that. But I wanted to get involved. I wanted to get involved from an undercover aspect with these guys. I knew I could run with these dudes, and get in. And even if I was working them from the outside, I knew I could do it. So everything in my career, during those first 7 or 8 years was building to working undercover.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then how does that manifest itself? Like, how does that begin?
So I had to I jumped around 2 agencies, and when I finally landed on ATF was a hard agency to get. So the reason I didn't know anything about ATF till I was in LA, and I got on that Rampart task force, and I saw the ATF guys. Like, I noticed the LAPD guys didn't have much respect for any of the feds,
Right.
except for the ATF guys.
Right.
Because the ATF guys were always in the mix. When there was a shootout, it was always an ATF guy.
Yeah.
Right? They were always in the mix. Undercover work, they were doing all that. They were the cowboys.
Yeah.
And I saw the respect the LAPD guys gave them even. And I said, that's where I need to be.
Yeah.
Small agency, only 2,000 agents. They didn't hire a lot, very hard to get into in the 90s. So when it finally opened up in 97, I was in Puerto Rico on a fugitive task force. And I put in and I was able to get the job. And my first day, I lucked out. So I put in for New York, Miami, and LA because I wanted the action, right? And those are cities generally agents are trying to get out of, right? So I figured I was a shoo-in. And they say, okay, we're going to hire you in Savannah, Georgia. And I was like, Savannah? But, sometimes things work out, right?
Sure.
So my first partner, the day I got there, he was a lunatic. Julio Delgado, he goes by. His real name's Randy Beach. He was an undercover guy. And the first day he says, you want to work undercover? I said, yep. He goes, all right, you're going to do a deal today. I hadn't even been to the academy yet. Right? So he goes,
what is with that with the AT? I mean, like Jay got shot on his first day. Like, what is that with the AT? Like, you just throw it, that's just what they do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They throw you to the wolves, man.
Okay,
yeah.
Sorry. Go
so
ahead.
I had no training in undercover, nothing. So he said, all right, my informant is going to bring you to the Crystal Burger, right? That's like, Crystal Burger is like the South's version of White Castle kind of, right?
Sure.
And he's a convicted felon. He's a member of the Pyru gang, and he's going to sell you a gun. He wants to sell this gun for $250. I said, okay. All right, let's do it. So Randy, he gives me $300. I put it in my pocket, and I get in a car, my undercover car, my brand new undercover car with the informant, and we drive to the Crystal Burger. And we walk in there. It's lunchtime. There's 1 million people in there, right? And there's this huge dude, big, tall dude. He's like, I don't know, 6'6". And the informant introduces me to him, and the informant runs out the door. So I'm like, what? Right? Is that supposed to happen? Like, where's this guy going, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I'm here. And the guy says, hey, man, follow me. And he goes into the bathroom. And it's a bathroom in a fast food, right? There's a sink, and there's a urinal, and there's one.
And in those days, do you have a radio on you? Do you have a gun on you? Like,
I had a wire. I had a wire on
okay.
me, yeah. So he opens the door to the toilet, and he's like, go in there. Okay, I guess this is how it's done. So I walk in there, and he comes in behind me and shuts it and latches it. So we're right here. I'm standing, the toilet's right here, and so I'm thinking, all right, this is my first day on the job, my first undercover deal, and it appears I've made some bad choices already, right? Because if it goes bad, my options are limited, man.
Yeah.
So, and I know there's going to be a gun involved because it's a gun deal.
Yeah.
So he pulls his gun out of his waist, and he was there to sell the gun. Thank God, man.
Yeah.
So I pull out he only wanted $250. I pull out $300 and give it to him, right? Because I just want to get the hell out of it. Yeah. I take the gun, I give him the $300, and so as we're walking out, I'm like, I didn't know the protocol. Am I supposed to break bread with this dude? Do we sit down and have a burger? I ran out the door just like the informant. I ran right out the door, and I tell you what, I got in my car, and I was driving back to the meat site, and I let the team know. I said, everything's good. I'm going back to the meat site. And I had that gun right here in the console. And it was the greatest feeling I've ever had in my life.
Huh.
It was the biggest high I've ever had in my life.
Huh.
I looked at that. I had just taken this gun off the streets, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that gun's killed a whole bunch of people. Maybe it was going to kill a whole bunch of people. But I just made a difference, man. Yeah, that was my high, man. And I never even slowed down after that, man.
Wow.
I was a dick. That was my drug, man.
Wow. Ultimately, like, you build this whole persona. I mean, you become this other person, and I imagine, like, you're new to Savannah, You needed to like learn the streets of Savannah, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how did that process go?
So I paid my due. My ultimate goal was to do what Jay Dobbins and Chris Bayless and John Babyface Carr were doing, right? These guys were going all over the country doing these long-term infiltrations. They were rock stars. That's what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you pay your dues, right? So paying your dues working undercover for the ATF means you're buying stolen pistols in alleyways, in car washes. You're buying 8-balls, right? In the back of some dude's car in the shopping mall parking lot. And so that's what I started doing. But that is how you get your base, like anything else, whatever your profession is. You start small and you pay your dues, right? And that's how you you develop a reputation, right? So my name started getting around a little bit, and I started developing a reputation. Hey, this guy's a worker. Guys, he's putting some food on the table, right? He's bringing the guns in.
And are you Sal at this point? I mean, are you this other guy now?
Yeah.
You're always.
Yep.
And you have his ID and everything?
Everything.
Already. Got
passports, credit cards, everything. Yep.
And in your mind, you have a whole backstory of this character. Like,
Absolutely.
If they ask you anything, and is it like the movies? Do you keep that close to yourself? Like, do you so you have like real facility with it?
We use, and again, I don't want to give up too many trade secrets, but we use, it's very creative. We use undercover guys. So if someone has to meet my family, there's undercover agents out there, old guys, who my father, my who will come in and do things to help us out. And again, I don't want to give away trade secrets.
Sure.
But we are backstopped in very creative ways so that if someone says, well, who was your 4th grade teacher? Give me proof of this. We have ways to do that because they do say that.
Sure.
And it does happen.
Sure.
And sometimes it happens when there's a shotgun pointed at you. So you better be able to regurgitate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I think everybody should read your book. Like I loved your book.
Thanks, brother.
I'm just one of the first things you talk about is the doctor that wanted you to kill his wife.
Yeah.
And you're out there as a hitman, as a guy, and it's like was that the first time somebody asked you to kill somebody for them?
Yeah, that was my first murder for hire.
And you saw the second where it was 100% clear that's what he wanted to do. Like it was,
Yep.
But it's like, it seemed to me, at least, maybe I'm bullshit, this is what I got from it, but there was like part of you really wanted to give this guy a shot to like sort of have a, can you just describe that for us?
So you got to give him an out, right? Because there's a lot of people talk and they talk, right? Oh, I hate my wife. I want to kill my wife, right? There's a lot of that, obviously, right? And women say the same thing, right? So I gave him many opportunities, and we always do this with these murder for hire investigations, to give him an out, to say, listen, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube once I do this, right? It's done.
Right.
Are you sure this is what you want?
Right.
Once you give me this money,
right,
and I go out there and I walk out of this parking lot or I drive out of here, there's no stopping it.
But are you
sure?
saying that? Are you saying that for legality? Or are you also saying that because it's like, hey, brother, like, is there any part of you that like feels for that guy?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
there
can you describe that?
So I want to be sure because, and it really, there's very few like 100% evil people in this world.
That's right.
If there's any, right? But I'm sure there's a few, but people get carried away, right? And people get a little out of control sometimes and say things they don't necessarily really mean literally when they're saying it. So yes, I want to be sure that this is his true intention, right? I don't want to jam some dude up who's just had a really tough month, right? And he's down on his luck, and I don't want to jam that dude up. I'd rather help that dude. But if his true intention is to hire someone, to kill his wife, I do want to jam him up. Yeah. So I got to be sure.
Yeah.
And I want to give him a couple chances to back out.
Yeah. And with him, like, didn't he kill his wives before? Didn't 2 of his other wives wind up dead?
So the one before her they found her in the bathtub in about 7 or 8 inches of water with her upper body above the water. And the autopsy was inconclusive. And, this is South Georgia. He was he was a doctor for the LPGA. He was very well known. It was a good old boy network. And there was no charges.
Yeah.
I mean, she was alone in the house.
Oh, man.
So yeah, I mean, this guy was evil.
Yeah.
There was no, and we knew that going into this. So I was pretty sure, even though I gave him those outs, I was pretty sure he was serious about it.
Yeah.
And I knew when he talked to me, you know, the vitriol, the hate that was coming out of him, I knew he meant it.
Yeah.
And it was just bizarre because this guy was a very successful doctor.
Yeah.
And you know, very different from the like psychological profile of most of the guys I'm working on, right? Most of the guys I'm working on are just thugs, right? Like hardcore street gangbangers. This dude's a doctor.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so the
yeah.
whole profile is different.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does that tell you sort of about like criminality in the first? I mean, you never know, right?
You
I mean,
never know. I mean, it's out there. It's everywhere. It's in your neighborhood, right? Yeah, we all know it's in the bad neighborhoods, but it's in the good neighborhoods too.
Sure.
Right? It's because it's in all of our hearts, man.
Sure.
You know,
sure.
it's just who can keep it suppressed.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. So how long is it? Is it really like the storefront operations? Like how long before you get? Is that you just got to get trust from the department?
Yeah. So once I had kind of a couple years going by, I had kind of proven myself. I started getting the call, and the first call was from Jay Dobbins and Chris Bayless. That was my first call. It was out in
and those guys were already heroes to you.
Heroes,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
Yeah. So there was three of them. There was Jay, Chris Bayless, John Babyface Carr. So Jay had whipped up this incredible case out in Arizona on a home invasion crew. He was buying kilos and bombs and all sorts of stuff. And he brought us in. He told these guys, I got my own crew. We were going to finish with a big home invasion. He said, I got my own crew. He goes, I'm going to bring them in for this. So this gang he's working on said, okay. So Jay said, listen, the bad guys are going to pick you up at the airport. You're enrolled when as you walk off that plane, you're enrolled. So I get off the plane and the bad guys are at the airport, scoop me up. And it was 2 weeks of insanity out there. Because,
Like what?
everything Bird did was over the top and insane. You know what I mean? You know, he had, we bought an RPG from these guys. Like who's selling RPGs out there, right? I mean, these dudes were there was no crime they weren't into. So we spent about 2 weeks out there just kind of, you know, feeling out, you know, so they could get to know his crew and we got to know them. And, you know, we bought some guns and some dopes from them, the RPG. Jay had already bought pipe bombs. And so on the last night before the takedown, Jay had arranged for the meeting with the bad guys to be at a strip joint. And he was kind of throwing a bone to the SWAT guys. You know, SWAT guys who cover us, SRT guys, they have the worst gig, right? They're always like up in a tree or right, and, you know, for hours. You know what I mean? And so Jay's like, "Hey, man, we do it at a strip joint. The boys can get dressed down and cover us, hang out at a strip joint while they're covering us." You know what I mean? So like, okay, cool. But you know, I was kind of the new guy in the mix. So Bird was like, "Hey, man, you're going to wear all the recording and monitoring device." So it's Arizona in the summer. So, and back then the Niagara recorder we used was like this big. So I had to put it all in my crotch, right? Because I'm wearing a t-shirt and jeans. So I got all this like in my crotch, you know, as a recording and monitoring equipment. And so Bird sends a stripper over to give me a lap dance to make me even more uncomfortable, right? So I figure, okay, you know, this is how it's going to go. So I asked the girl, I said, "Hey, what'd he give you for this?" And she said, $20. I said, "Well, here's 40. I said, "Go give him a dance." I said, "But he's kind of kinky." I said, when you're done with the dance, I go, "Give him a little slap in the face."
Yeah.
She goes, "Okay." So she goes over there, she starts dancing for him. And I swear to God, I got pictures to prove it.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, she comes up with this Mike Tyson right hook right here in his cheekbone and busts him wide open. I mean, wide open. It was spraying. She was wearing rings. Like, so I'm like, so I'm thinking, I'm sitting there watching this blood spurt out of his face. And all I'm thinking is, my undercover career is over, man. Like, that's the last invite I will ever get. To say he was pissed is an understatement. Because he had to go home and explain to Gwen, to his wife, right? Why his face was busted up from a strip joint. So literally the SRT guy is suturing him. I run in the bathroom to apologize. He's getting sutured in the stall of the strip joint bathroom. That's how bad it was.
Wow.
And so I'm like, oh, that's it. I'm done. So we do the takedown goes great the next day. Bird's not saying much to me. And I talked to Chris Bayless. I said, "Dude," I said, "did I just do myself? Is it over?" He goes, "Bro, if we get over these things, it happens I'll smooth it out. And Chriser smoothed it all out, and everything was good. And I went on to, thank God, do a whole bunch more and work with those guys all the time.
Sure,
You know,
sure,
so.
sure.
But I almost blew it all that first time.
Yeah. What is like a, just for people that don't know, like a storefront operation? What does that entail? And I'm really interested in sort of like the street theater of it and how you talk about it.
So the government, we set up a false business, okay, and we don't do it haphazardly, right? We find these areas in town where the gun crime is just out of control.
Yeah.
And, using these statistics, we justify these operations by saying, the shootings, the gun recoveries, in this area. So we're going to open up a storefront operation. We open up a business that we choose, and we run this business. It's owned and operated by the government, staffed entirely by undercover agents. We embed ourselves in the community, and we start buying guns and drugs. And we target the trigger pullers and the guys who are putting guns on the street. That's who we're targeting. And we use a network of informants sometimes, to help us out, especially to get started. And we just start buying guns. And it is amazing once you get started how these things spider web, right? And once the word gets out, how it spider webs. My hustle was always the same. Sal Nunziato, I was from New York, and I would take these guns, and you could buy a gun in Georgia for $100. You could sell it on the streets of Brooklyn for $1,500, and that's no bull.
Yeah.
And that was my hustle. And I had moving trucks, and we had things set up where we would show them how we would secrete when we got enough guns. Once I got up to like 200 or 300 guns, I would secrete these guns in furniture. We'd have it stuffed with furniture. This is some people's furniture. We're just moving them up north. So, if we get pulled over by Johnny Law, hey man, we're just moving furniture. We don't know, right? So, and these guys love that.
Yeah.
We would have cigarette master cases and Newports and Marlboros, but the bottom would be hollowed out. So even if you open the box, you could pull cartons out, but underneath it was all guns. We would show these guys this. We would have the traps in our undercover vehicles where you press the air conditioning and you put it to a radio channel, and the back seat opens up, and you can put in 10 kilos or a couple machine guns, whatever. So we would use street theater where we would bring in undercover agents from other areas, and we would do drug and gun deals in front of the bad guys to boost our credibility.
Yeah, can you explain how that you would use them as security and stuff? Like how would that work?
So, and this was my favorite thing to do in these storefront operations. First of all, I would have a team, right? And you would make a team, and I always considered it, it was like the Avengers, right? My undercover team that we would put together. So, you would have all different ethnicities and males, females, and everyone had their skill. You know what I mean? Everyone had their skill. Everyone had their certain thing they were good at. Maybe it was buying pills. Maybe it was buying the NFA weapons, the machine guns, the sawed-off shotguns, whatever it was. But everyone specialized in something, and we would put together that team, and that's who would staff these operations. So what we would do, because who just keeps buying drugs and buying guns? Cops. So you have to show these guys what you're doing with it so they don't start questioning you. That's where street theater came in. So I would call a couple guys from a different office, a couple undercover guys from the undercover program or whoever it may be, and say, hey, can you come in and do some street theater? We're going to do the Mr. Big scenario, right? So I would tell whatever local gang I was working with, whoever was hanging out, I would say, listen, I got some bikers coming in. I don't trust these motherfuckers. I never dealt with them before. You guys mind posting up security for this deal? And they'd be like, that's what we do, right? And I'd say, listen, man, I'll pay you whatever. So we would set up, maybe it would be 20 machine guns, maybe it would be 20 kilos of meth, right? And either I would be selling it or I would be buying. Usually I would be selling it. So me and my crew, we would break 20 real kilos out of evidence, and we'd let the bad guys finger it and everything, the crew before the deal. And here's the dirty part of it. So, I'll tell you the dirty part afterward. So the agents would come into town, right? And we don't have this all scripted beforehand. So we'd say, all right, be at the place at 12 o'clock before we open. So the bad guys would show up. I'd tell them where to post. I say, all right, you post up here. You stay with me. You get by the door. Okay, man, we got this. So our guys would call right on my undercover phone, and I'd be like, okay, yeah, you 10 minutes out? All right, we'll see you then. I'd be like, all right, they're in a white van. They're on the way. So they'd show up, and they see these big gorillas get out, and the bad guys would be like, oh, they're here. And these dudes would come in, and they'd play it super cool, right? However they did it. They might be a little bit confrontational, right? Or they might be dap hugging everybody and all that. And we would do a deal, right? We would just let it flow however the deal went. Like I said, it might be confrontational. We might argue about the money, whatever, but they would show up with a suitcase full of money, right? And I would sell them 20 kilos. They would take it and go. And then I'd give that suitcase of money, or I'd give the suitcase of money they gave me to one of my guys and tell them, take it to the spot. Cause I never wanted the bad guys that were helping me to think it was there, because they'd come back and rob me later.
Yeah.
So these guys would see that happen, and the word would go out like, oh, these motherfuckers are for real. They are moving. Now, the dirty part is, if they showed up with guns, which they always did, they just bought themselves 5 more years, because they just brought a gun to a narcotics transaction. It doesn't matter that it's a fake narcotics transaction.
Right.
That's federal law.
Right.
So we were not only like using them for this and to spread the word, but we were also tacking 5 years on top of their sentence because they showed up with a gun.
Wow.
Which is dirty. I don't like that when I think about it afterward.
Yeah. Yeah. But part of the deal.
That was part of the deal.
And being in these communities for as long as you were, you know, it's like you're establishing real relationships. And I know you've like talked about specific, and I know like eventually this started to like really weigh on you.
Big time.
And you know, you're bringing so much of yourself. And I think in a way too, you know, one of the things I want to talk about is you're losing a lot, right? Because you're not around the family. And I mean, obviously you got really close with some of the guys that you ended up bringing down. But I mean, even before that, you know, I think that there's this stigma now with like policing in this country, you know, there's like sort of a us and them type mentality. But I imagine you were seeing things in the criminal world. I mean, one, it sounds like you would set up one of these shops and then it would just, and from reading the book, it would just sort of like open up the floodgates of how much criminality was going on. So one, was that a surprise? And two, were there things that you were seeing in this criminal element? Were there things that you were seeing that you respected? Were there things that you were seeing where you were like, you sort of admired either the ingenuity or the intelligence or the loyalty among some of these guys?
Totally.
Can you give me some examples?
So there was some good people coming into those operations. And we met some good people. Some good people who were involved in no criminality at all, who were just coming in there. And some of the guys who were out there hustling, you know, selling guns or selling dope, they were good guys.
Yeah.
Right? Men and women. So as far as the success, I was incredibly, from the beginning, the first one I did was a tattoo shop up in Augusta. And 12 months, we ran that for 12 months. We had 430 crime guns we had bought in 12 months. So I never expected that kind of success, the way it went. But you know, we had different gangs coming in, and our big rule was that there was no beefing, right? That was a neutral place, but that didn't last, right? There was fist fights, and we were out there. But we got in so tight with so many of these groups, right? And you know, when you just stood there and bullshit with a lot of these guys, they were good kids, man.
Yeah, yeah.
They were doing stupid out there in the street, but a lot of them were just a product of their environment. And again, I don't make excuses for criminality, but when you grow up in it and that's all you know, what are your options, man? How are you going to put food on the table? Right? They were doing what they knew. And a lot of them, when you took the time to get to know them, they were smart, right? They were creative. They didn't have direction. The majority of them, they didn't have that figure telling them what was right and wrong and what path to take. You know, they took the path they saw that the guys they were hanging out with took. And that's all they had. And so that's what they were doing. Now, it's kind of a complicated issue, obviously, because when it comes to putting guns on the street, you know, what are you going to do? These guns are killing people, right? So whoever's doing it needs to go. But there's always that little war inside of you when you're working undercover and you finally get to know these people. Mm-hmm. And you say, man, that dude's just, if you put him in a different set of circumstances, right? If you change the game and could transplant him into someone else's life, dude would flourish. Yeah. But he is where he is, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Ultimately, you started to not want to be around for the takedowns.
Yep.
How did that work? And what would it do? What would it do to you to sort of see that? And like, when was the first time you sort of saw that betrayal kind of, in real life?
So it was a funny thing in that after the takedowns would happen, the communities were kind of disappointed in us because a lot of them were just coming in there and they had gotten to know us and they were actually, buying our merchandise and they thought, we were good dudes and we had developed relationships and they learned out we're undercover federal agents and it was disappointing to them. And so although we did some good in their community and we took a lot of guns off their streets, there was a personal kind of disappointment. And I was like, yeah, that kind of sucks, right? And as far as the guys we had gotten to know, a lot of it came about because of a lot of the unfair sentencing guidelines for the dope. Back then we're still buying a lot of crack cocaine. And you make a couple buys, you get a guy over 50 ounces, which is not a lot.
Right.
I was watching these dudes go away for over 20 years, and I was like, damn, the guy who sold me 3 guns just got 3 years. Dude sold me, 52 ounces, and he just got 24 years. And I was like, man, there's something's not right there, right? Something.
What do you think that is? Like, how did that play out in your own head and heart?
It's funny, when I first got on the job, the big thing was how many years you could get, like how big this, in federally you're sentenced in months, right?
Sure.
So, it was like that number. You want every guy you got to get like the highest number you could get. And it was almost a pride thing, right? But then when I started working undercover and as you got to know these guys, that kind of hit home and you were like, man, I don't know if that is really going to help society. If him going away for 26 years, is that helping society? We're going to put this guy in prison and pay a lot of money for him to be in prison. Does that make it better? Or is there another option? Sure. Right.
Sure.
And again, these are deep questions that I don't know the answer to.
Sure. Well, it's crazy though, because it seems like, in order for you to get to the level that you got to, and then, ultimately with Russians and with biker gangs and all that you've done, it's like almost like the main tool you need to have is you need to be able to understand people. You need to be able to get close to people. But that's also going to be the thing that's going to end up hurting you the most because you're getting close with people.
Exactly. Like you start liking these guys, and there was guys who this will not make me popular to say this, but there was dudes who I was working undercover on and I developed relationships with that would jump in front of a bullet for me before people in my office would.
Wow.
And that's how deep it went. And that's why that betrayal, especially toward the end of my career, started cutting a little bit.
Can you give me an example of somebody that you got enormously close with and felt that way about?
So the guy in Chicago, I went up there on this crazy case that the Crisser was kind of the Geppetto on that case. And he brought me in. And this guy was a member of the mafia. He was in the Sarno crime family. They call it the Outfit up in Chicago. And he was also an outlaw biker. He was with the Outlaws. And, it was, the trial was called Family Secrets. It was a big deal up there. And he was this is when they realized that the two were working together. These two huge criminal organizations, the Italian mafia and the 1%er outlaw biker world, they were working together. So Crisser had brought me in to do this undercover. And I was posing as like a down and out MMA fighter up there. It was a wacky case where I brought this dude. He was in Cicero and he owned a Goldberg Jewelers. And I brought these teeth that Crisser had gotten with they were gold crowns that had blood stains still on them. And I brought him in there. That was my cold intro to this guy. And it worked, right? Through going there multiple times, eventually I got in the door and it worked. And I ended up just spending a lot of time with this dude. And he was another one of these guys. There was no crime he wasn't into. He was having meetings in his back room with the gangster disciples, the Latin Kings, the Italian mafia, the Outlaws, you name it. He was dealing with all of them. And I just spent a lot of time with him. Like, he introduced me. I met his son. He was a good dad. And he would introduce me to his people, and it meant something to him when he would introduce me because he was almost kind of proud of me. You know what I mean? And there was a night when we were out. He wanted to meet me out at a strip club, and he started toasting me, and he said, "Listen, I can't trust the people that I grew up with, the people around me in my life." He goes, "It's my 40th birthday. I didn't even know it." He goes, "So I appreciate you being here."
He wanted to be with you.
Yep. And I was thinking to myself, man, boy, you picked the wrong motherfucker to trust, dude. But I mean, and if you don't feel that, inside, like there's something wrong with you. Like you shouldn't be working undercover. I feel if that doesn't kind of get you a little bit, because it got me. I was like, Jesus Christ, man, I don't feel good about this.
Yeah.
And then so the moment that what you asked about, when they went to take him down, this was a joint case with ATF and FBI. And they wanted to see if they could flip this guy. And I knew that this guy wasn't going to flip, right? I mean, you just know, right?
Right.
So they had me and my partner Tino, they had us bring him to this hotel room at the Hilton at the O'Hare Airport in Chicago. He thought he was going to meet Hoist Gracie. And he was going to meet a bunch of ATF and FBI agents who had put all the evidence against him in a room, boxes of evidence, because they thought that was going to make an impact. I got him there, and first of all, he had his son with him, and I was like, "Geez," right? So anyway, we get there, and he's not saying, right? And so they come to me in the back room, and they're like, "Hey, go in there and show him your badge." And I was like, "Really? Really?"
So this is you bring him in. So you're driving over that day.
Yep.
He has no idea what's waiting for him. It's you, him, and his son.
I walk him in, and they jump out, and boom. And so I get into another room. I'm figuring at least I'm feeling like, but my job's done. Then they come to me like, "Hey, go."
Did they throw you up against the wall too and handcuff you?
No,
you just split.
They told him right away, and he was like, "No," and he wasn't saying much. So they wanted me to go in there, badge him, and see if I get him to talk. And I was like, "Really?" So I go in there, and I show him my badge, and I say, "Hey, Mark, listen." I said, "I just want you to know that, man, this is not personal. I had a job to do. I had an assignment, and I was doing my job, and it's not personal." And he looked up at me, and he goes, "Really?" He goes, "It's not personal." He goes, "I brought you into my family." He goes, "I brought you into my home." He goes, "Every single thing that you have said to me up to this point has been a lie, and it's not personal." Dude, I had nothing to say to that. I had nothing to say to that. I just turned and walked out. And then when he did go to trial, and he got 60 years. I couldn't even look at him in the courtroom, man. It was a tough one, That level of betrayal, had started to become tough on me.
But like that level is what I guess is needed, though,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's like,
Sure.
Because I mean, if I remember right, there had been numerous agents that had tried to even just gain entrance. I mean, they had been trying forever to get into that shop. And I mean, look, I mean, it's like these bigger philosophical questions, right? Like, was he a bad man? Like, what kind of man do you like? How would you? Because I know it's tough, man. Like he's your friend. I talk to my friend Carl about this all the time. It's like some of these guys. It's like, dude, they're my friend, man. And it's like, but what was he doing that you feel, or do you feel that he needed to be taken off the streets?
He was sending out robbery crews that were hitting joints. They were knocking off tractor trailers full of flat screens and all that. I mean, there was definitely a level of violence that he was directing. Beside just the drugs and the usual selling of drugs, there was a level of violence that he was into. That's inherent. What he had actually done is it was the mob was putting in these video gambling machines in these businesses, and one business didn't want to play ball, so him and his crew blew the place up with a bomb. So and it's hard to have any sympathy for a bomber, right? So
unless you go into his home and meet his kids, and
his wife loved him, his son loved him, right? So again, we were talking, no one's all bad. So it's hard. It's all perspective, I guess, and you can spend a lot of time with a cold-blooded killer and think they're a great guy.
Yeah.
But there's something in them that a dark area you don't want to know about, but everything else is okay. So.
One thing I hear from guys who've been on for a long time is like, not many people really want to be cops anymore.
No.
The kind of people that are coming on are a different breed. You got real work slowdowns. Yep. You got a lot of cops whose hands are tied. You got a lot of like just discontent for the police in general. And I feel like so much of that comes from sort of the natural division and the lack of, honestly, I mean, it's a weird word to use, but like the lack of empathy that's involved, because you don't have people who are either from these communities or who have been bold enough to actually experience it, to see that both things can be true, that you can be you can be engaged in criminal activity, but you can be a good person that wants the best for your family, and that there's some people that are beyond repair. There's some people that, just like the crime is too, like, we got to get that person off the street. There's some people that maybe potentially you can show another way, and they're just playing the cards that they're dealt. But it's because there's not enough people that have actually rubbed elbows and like been right in there. The show is called Real Ones, not to be a cheese, but like, that's why we have, you know, one thing I really found, I mean, I knew from the second you and I started talking and who your friends are, but you know, who you are in the community, but also in your book, it's like there's a lot of humility and a lot of empathy and a lot of looking at yourself and admitting things that were difficult and admitting mistakes. What do you think about that as far as policing in the culture, and what does it say about somebody who's sort of unable to do that?
So if you're unable to do that, if you're unable to look inside and say, and I was for a long time, and say, hey man, maybe I'm not doing things the way I should be doing them, then you're bound to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Right? And things will never improve with your relationship with the community if you can't step back and say, maybe this isn't the right way, right? Maybe there's another option. So it needs to really, I think, come from both sides, right? So from the community side and from the law enforcement side, to kind of get together and say, all right, listen, there is a happy medium someplace, right? There's a happy medium out there somewhere where, you know, as law enforcement, we can say, all right, we need to change tactics, right? You know, this is old and this doesn't apply anymore, you know, and the community needs to say, okay, we're going to show you some love and support for protecting us and for doing the right thing. And you know, we're going to police our own a little bit better to make your job a little bit easier, you know, and so the two can meet. It can happen. And it has happened in some places. But until that happens on a grand scale, man, look at Chicago this weekend, man. It's just, we got to get there, man. You know, we got to get there. And it's got to come from both sides. Both sides have to do a little soul searching.
I mean, it's interesting because I remember parts in your book, you know, where you said even like the guys that would come in, these gangbangers or gang members or guys from the criminal community that you would sort of bring in to do security for you, where even they would say, man, that was some Hollywood. Right? Like they would get caught up in the stuff that you guys were doing. It was almost like larger than life. And it's like a lot of that stuff, because Hollywood, it's so like glorified and romanticized. And I think, like you said it yourself, like one of the reasons you wanted to do it is you saw that guy pull up in that car looking the way he did. I want in. You know, my friend Carl Townley in Shreveport, his uncle was undercover narcotics. Carl was like on his way to being a criminal, and he was like, well, I could do that. Like that's the cool. So there's this idea, this coolness, right? Was there ever a time, besides like the betrayal, was there ever a time when you really felt like, I mean, I know your life has really been in danger, but was there ever a time where you said, man, this ain't for me, or was there ever a time where you thought that sort of the heat just got too intense?
You know, that's a funny question, because that never happened in the second half of my career when I started doing these long-term undercover infiltrations, because I had gotten so comfortable. Those situations happened when I was in that period I told you about, when I was kind of earning my way. When I was doing the deals in the alleyway, right? And when I had dudes stick guns in my faces a couple times, right, during a deal, and they'd stick the gun in your face, you cop, or whatever it was, or they were just there to rip you, right? They knew you were showing up with money. They had no intention of selling you that gun. Right. They were just going to keep the gun and rip you. Those times was when I had some doubt, right? When you're looking down the barrel, right? And you know this kid probably isn't going to shoot you, because he really does. He wants to make some money and keep making money, but they might, right? And that's when I had some of that self-doubt. And that was in what we call quick hits. That when I was just an informant would introduce me to a bad guy. We'd set up a deal at a car wash. Right. And those were always the scariest times, when my life was really in danger, because the guy who you've embedded yourself with and you've spent, 8 months with, or the crew or whatever it is, they're much less likely to kill you if they find out who you are. All they're going to do is distance themselves. They don't want to bring heat, right, on their organization or anything. Right. They're just going to get as far away from you as they can.
Did that ever happen? Were you ever made?
I was never made. No. But that kid in the car wash, he'll shoot you.
He'll shoot the shit out of you.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't care who you are.
Right.
You know, so I experienced that early in my undercover career. As I went along, probably one of the dangers of working undercover for as long as I did and some of the other guys did is you become comfortable.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the biggest danger. So the way I dealt with that is to work undercover, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. So for me, just my coping with that and how I did that was if I was in another city or wherever I was, I would walk into a boxing gym or a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym, right? And I would, like I told you, I was a terrible boxer. I would get in a ring with a pro, right? A local pro, you know, and I would spar 2 or 3 rounds. And as you know, as a boxer, you know, even some local pro who just fights in clubs will just take you apart, right? I mean, the skill difference was so when you're in that ring and you know there's still about 2 minutes left in the round and you have no gas left and this dude's so much better than you, you got to be comfortable being uncomfortable as your face is getting punched. Same thing on the jiu-jitsu mat, right? When you're rolling with a brown belt or a black belt whose skill level is so much higher than you, and you know your face is in the mat and you pin, you better be comfortable being uncomfortable. You better learn how to breathe. And so that's what I would do so that I could be comfortable while I was uncomfortable in those situations. You know, that helped me transfer over.
Yeah. Yeah. And talk a little bit about your family. And you know, I got real busy with my career sort of right at the time where I started a family. So I just wasn't really there. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And it took this enormous toll on me, on my family, and my wife. And it gets to the point where it's almost like that level of getting out the door and getting into it. It's like that's almost becomes your home.
Yep.
And I know I know there's a lot of people that kind of go through that. I'm just wondering, you know, how you look back on that now. I know how good of a father you are, and I know how much you care. You know what I mean? It was the first thing you and I talked about. It's what you wrote in the inscription. You talked about your kid, you know, like I know, and I believe that I don't know if you believe this, but I really believe that, man, you could be doing 20 years in prison. You could be some piece of who's ran and that, but like it's all like being a parent, man. It's like it's always, you're never gonna love anything like that, whether you're near, far, close, you know, never seen them. It's always there. It's always present. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you feel now looking back? Can you take me through sort of the journey of your family life and how the toll that work took on it and how you've dealt with it?
Yeah. So I was just like you when I hit the ground running in my career is coincidentally when I had a family.
Yeah.
You know, and I realize now you cannot be a great undercover agent and be a great family man. The two are mutually exclusive. You just can't, because if you want to be great at undercover always has to come first. It just does. That's the way it is. And it did in my life. So I look back and I think about, you know, what my wife, who has her own career, right? And super strong woman with her own career. And, you know, what I left her with so many times, right? You know, I'm in, and it really doesn't matter if you're, as you know, it doesn't matter if you're 30 miles away or 3,000 miles away. If you're not home, you're not home, right? Doesn't matter what, all those kids know is you're not at that recital.
That's right.
You're not at that game. You know, your wife knows, you know, she's got to go to work and have her career, and she's got to, you know, pick up and drop off and do all that. And you're not there. So it really doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're not there, you're not there. And when I look back and I think about the times that I wasn't there, you know, and what I missed, and there's no getting it back. You know, there's no getting it back. You can't go back. There's no magic that'll ever get back what you missed. All you can do is from the moment that light goes on and you realize it, you just make up for lost time.
Yeah.
You do the best you can to fill that void and make up for lost time. So I try to live with no regrets, right? I mean, because they're useless. Regrets are useless.
Yeah.
However, there's always a hole in there from what I missed, man. You know.
But it what you're saying is you put that into action. You do something about it. You be where
Absolutely,
you are while you're there.
man.
And you do it now, and you do you got today and you got tomorrow.
That's right.
And what would you say, like, in your career? What are you most proud of? What would you say?
Yeah, the numbers. So the sheer numbers. Like, remember I described that feeling when I had that first gun. Um, so the end of my career was like a dumpster fire, right? And I actually had a little bit of time at the end of my career to compile all of my reports, right? From back from 1998 when I started working undercover, and I went through everything and I started counting up, and I had bought in undercover transactions over 1,000 crime guns off the street. So if there's one thing I'm most proud of, it's the number of guns. Because when you buy one gun off the street, it's hard to quantify that, right? It's hard to say that gun might have killed a bunch of people. Sometimes we can find out if it has through NIBIN and through these different techniques, But now that it's out of this bad guy's hands, it's not going to kill anyone else, right? So that's a good feeling to me. That's why buying dope never appealed to me, right? Dope is dope. It's out there. You're not even going to plug that hole in that dam with dope.
Right.
But guns mean something, man. When you get a crime gun off the street, it means something. And the fact that I was able to buy so many, over 1,000 during my career, that is my proudest achievement, man.
For a guy like you've seen firsthand, you've had guns pulled on you. You've definitely seen people shot. You've seen the effect of what guns can do, and I know you've lost people to gun violence, people that you care about deeply. Like what's your opinion now, man? Like, what's your opinion now, like on the gun? Like, I don't really. It's not the politics. I don't give a about politics, but in terms of the culture of guns in this country. And I don't mean to put you on the spot with that. I can tell you exactly how kind of I feel, but you said that's what you're kind of most proud of, and we're in a place now where man, you drive down the street and it's the odds are most people are armed. And is that a good thing, a bad thing? Like, I'm just interested in like what your take is on that.
My opinion on it is a lot of people fail to look at it realistically, right? We have to be real about where we are right now today. So, and the stats are there are more guns in this country than there are people right now. There's more guns than people, right? There's 330 something million people there's more guns. There's
Don't ask us. Are you stoned, man?
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll talk later. Right. So, right. So how do you address it? The reality of it, right? You can say, man, it'd be great if there was no guns, and it would be, but how do you address the reality of it? So my unpopular answer is, first of all, we got to take the trigger pullers off the street, right? The known trigger pullers in every neighborhood, got to get them off the street. So hire more ATF agents, which people hate to hear that. And the gun people hate to hear that, but hire more ATF agents to help.
Why do they hate to hear that?
Yeah, it's a very anti-ATF atmosphere out there. The Second Amendment people hate ATF. They always have. A lot of Congress, they hate ATF, and they keep us small and underfunded and underpowered because of that. But there's nothing wrong with enforcing the gun laws that are on the books, right? Listen, task forces work. When ATF pairs up with the city police department, like in Baltimore, there's been some great ones. The city cops know who are pulling the triggers, right? Let's go after those guys. Let's start out addressing the gun problem by getting the trigger pullers off the street. And like the worst of the worst, the people who we know are using guns who shouldn't have them, let's get them and let's get their guns off the street. Let's just start there, man.
Yeah.
It's to me that seems like a simple enough start.
Do you have any opinions about like gun laws or like what should be legal, what shouldn't be legal, background checks, any of that? I mean, I don't even know. I mean, I know it's like different state by state, but like, do you have any kind of like take on that from being a guy who's gotten so many guns off the street?
Yeah, we have great gun laws. A lot of people hate our gun laws, but I believe in them. We have good gun laws. We need to enforce them more. They're not enforced enough. And the background checks we have are good, but where it fails and where the system fails is in mental health. Because there's no effective background check that addresses mental health. And look at all the recent shootings. I'm not talking about a lot of the, more urban, which are mostly drug boy shootings. I'm talking about these shootings that happen where these dudes are out killing 5-6 people.
Yeah.
It's mental health.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer how you figure that out, but there's got to be some checks and balances, right, to figure out if this guy who's trying to buy a gun has had some issues or having some issues.
Sure.
Again, we can do all this. We got AI. We can, do all that. We can figure it out.
Yeah.
We need a better mental health system to keep people who are having mental health issues away from guns.
Yeah. Yeah.
The guns are out there. There's guns out there.
You're never going to do anything about that.
No, it's hard. You can't, again, can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, man. They're out there.
That's right.
So let's enforce the laws and let's address this mental health thing.
What would you say is like the biggest misconception about sort of criminality in this country, about street gangs, about organized crime? What do you think people just get wrong about that and don't understand?
I think the glorification of a lot of these groups and a lot of these guys. And when I would go in and I would live with these guys and I would be with them day after day, Hollywood and the general public, are romanticizing what they're, and a lot of them were just petty thieves and they were domestic abusers. And there was nothing that was romantic, or appealing about anything they were doing. They were stealing and robbing and they were violent and there was nothing romantic about it. You know what I mean? Nothing at all. So I think that the people out there, they want to emulate, some of the more notorious guys out there in the world who we've seen in movies, and when in fact there wasn't nothing cool about them. Yeah. They treated women terribly. They'd steal the money out of your wallet if it was in a room with them. They had no honor.
I remember when I was when I was a Cowser student, right? And but I really wanted to wanted to play sports in college, when I was there, and we had to do a senior project in order to graduate. So me and my buddies, we took bartending. We went to bartending school. I mean,
awesome.
in DC, yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
And in DC, you could be a bartender at 18, but you could go to bartending school at 18 in Virginia. So we went to Virginia, Kathy Cherry's bartending school. There's this guy there who I think he was ATF. He was an undercover. He would like hang out there. Anyhow, so I remember he told us this story, and I didn't know if it was bullshit or not. I was, an impressionable kid, but he told me and my buddies the story that he was like infiltrating this motorcycle gang. And you're like, yeah, maybe not. Like starting off with that to an 18-year-old kid.
Right.
But he said that he was at this bar, and he said that one of the guys in the gang came up to him and said, hey, I bet you I could knock my old lady further across this bar than you could. And the guy said, well, who goes first? And he goes, you do. And he said that he knocked the woman across the bar, punched her in the face so he wouldn't blow his cover. First question, is that bullshit? Second question, what? Second question, one is that, but do you think that's bullshit? Second question, what was the most compromised you felt you ever were, where you had to do something or say something or that you really didn't want to do or you regretted doing? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but like, man, it's just like two guys talking. But like, there's always that scene. I always think about. I'm sure you see Donnie Brasco's and whatever, but where like he starts beating the guy up at their Japanese restaurant. Was there ever a situation that you were in like that you had to do something you really didn't want to do or you really regretted doing? And also you think that guy was bullshitting me? Just to settle a debate among me and my buddies.
All right. That is definitely something a biker would do.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that scenario is totally believable. I've seen very similar things to that. But the fact that guy was telling you that he was infiltrating a motorcycle club is probably bullshit. But the scenario is totally realistic, man.
Okay.
Totally realistic. I'll tell you my biggest regret is it kind of goes in a weird way of, I was drunk one night and I was laying on this filthy pool table. And
This is on the job?
On the job, and there was this huge dude who was like on top of me. And he stunk. I mean, he stunk. And he was giving me a tattoo with a needle that was already in the thing. So he didn't take the needle out. It was already in the gun. So obviously it was not a sterile needle. And he was giving me this awful tattoo. And I was doing it because that's what I had to do, right? To get in with these guys and to be accepted with these guys was to get this tattoo from this dude. But again, I was drunk. He was drunk. He stunk. I can remember that sweet, like jail smell he had.
Yeah.
And this filthy tattoo gun he was using as he's tattooing me. And I kind of had to do it, right? This was early on in the case and I had to do it. But I had this moment of clarity while that was going on, as drunk as I was. And I remember thinking, just as the tattoo was going in, like, wow, my mom would be so disgusted with me right now. Like, I came from a good family. My mom, one of those Italian ladies who went to church like all the time and prayed for me. And if she could see me right now, she would be so disgusted. I would be such a disappointment to my mother right now. If she could see me, like, and thinking, what the am I doing? I went to college, came from a good family. Why am I on this filthy pool table, getting a tattoo from this filthy, dirty mother? Like, what am I thinking, man? How did I end? Like the same way I thought about how did that MS-13 guy get from there to there? How did I get here right now? And that was a time when I felt most compromised because I felt like I was giving up my own values and letting down my parents, by, there was just no reason for that. And I just felt like, well, I would be a letdown to my parents, because the interesting thing, my father was never happy. My father didn't like the government, right? Well, most Italians had a little thing against the federal government, you know what I mean? And he wasn't jumping up for joy when I told him I was becoming a Fed, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I never wanted to disappoint my parents. And sometimes I ended up doing things, even though I was doing them generally for the right reasons, but I was just going overboard. And I was like, man, I'm probably letting my parents down right now if they're watching,
Huh. And when you said your career sort of ended in a dumpster fire,
Oof.
yeah, can you explain?
Yeah, I got to a point where I was Sal Nunziato a lot more than I was Lou Valoze. And I was buying into my own bull.
How so?
And Sal Nunziato had a great life, man. Everybody loved Sal Nunziato, man, right? Everybody loved him. Fun time guy, right? Throwing money around, great dude. Gangster, running the streets. And, Lou Valoze's life wasn't so great. And, I became, I kind of had bought my own bullshit and had become a lot more Sal Nunziato. And it led to, it led to bad behavior and stupid. And that is not, I'm not using that as an excuse. I did it.
What kind of bad behavior and stupid?
Well, it led to infidelity. And, that ultimately kind of ended up being the downfall of my career. It was with a federal prosecutor. And when that came out, obviously there's conflicts there if that prosecutor is prosecuting the case you're working undercover on. If that relationship isn't disclosed to the courts, there's an issue. And when that got out, that was something that was very, very juicy to the press. And it got splattered all over the internet and the news. And, people already looking to bash ATF for anything. And this was kind of at the height of the storefront operations. And it certainly didn't help, this kind of press. And it kind of sent me in a downward spiral. Everyone, the people that I had worked with and worked for at the U.S. Attorney's Office turned their back on me immediately. And ATF.
Shut up, dude.
My own agency was good. They kind of understood and they said, but OIG had taken over and they said, we can't really help you, because the OIG is in charge. And now I'm under investigation after 25 years. And my mind couldn't accept that, that I had been selling out, and I had been everything. I'd given everything in my life. I had sacrificed everything, and now the tables were turned,
Hmm.
and I went into a spiral. I mean, I went down. I went from 250 to about 198 in a couple weeks. I looked
Wow.
like a crackhead,
Wow.
and I ended up at a psychiatrist, and I ended up. I mean, I didn't see a way out because now my own government was coming after me, and I didn't see any way out. And the only thing I didn't want to see, I didn't want to see my son or my daughter ever reading something bad about me, right? That their dad was a dirty, no good cop, because I wasn't. Um, and I saw how unscrupulous the government can be, right? They didn't want mud on their face from all these operations or something, so they decided that, they were gonna come after us. And so while they sicked the OIG on us, which is the Office of Inspector General, and this was going on, I went into this downward spiral of suicidal thoughts, and just I couldn't accept reality, what was going on, and I really had nowhere to turn. Right, my wife certainly didn't want to help me out at this point.
Yeah.
Right, the betrayal there. My friends, I had friends that I hadn't called in decades, that I had distanced myself from because I was working undercover, saving the world, and in my opinion. And I found myself strangely alone, and my
Hmm.
phones were silent. And what saved me was my crew, my undercover brothers and sisters, who knew I was righteous and they didn't abandon me. And they took turns flying into Georgia to
Wow.
try and keep me from doing something stupid, and to deal with my wife. I ended up at a psychiatrist's office, and and it was my wife, who actually set me straight,
Wow.
and looked at me and said, if you're thinking about doing something stupid, I'm going to make sure your son knows, that his dad let him down.
Mm.
And that was the last time I ever had any stupid thought, in my mind. So from that point at that psychiatrist's office that day, I kind of started the rebuilding process. And I had to rebuild every relationship in my life because I had destroyed all my relationships because of, the whole undercover thing where I had, taken it to heart and I was doing it for the right reasons, but I didn't realize that I had let it kind of take over my life, and I was doing it kind of, uh, putting it over in importance over what was really important, over my family and my friends. So I had to start a long multi-year process of rebuilding my life, of rebuilding these relationships in my life and gaining my wife's trust back. I couldn't do it through words. You have to do it through actions, right? And that takes time.
Sure.
And with my children, building relationships, and it was hard coming out, and of course, I was cleared of any wrongdoing and all that, and I retired with honors from ATF. But I was done. I was, obviously I wasn't working undercover anymore, and my career was over at that point. And I had to reinvent myself at that point. I was lost. My phone stopped ringing. I had my undercover phone, my government phone, my personal phone that would ring nonstop.
Sure.
And guys needed this, supervisors,
Sure.
informants, bad
Sure.
guys.
Sure.
Silence,
Sure.
nothing.
Sure.
The silence was deafening.
I bet.
And so I did. I had to kind of reinvent myself, man. I had to start from scratch. I retired young. I got on the job at 22. I retired at 48,
Wow.
26 years. And I found myself about 50 years old, and everything was silent. And I kind of, I've been rebuilding a life ever since then.
And how do you look at that now, man? Was that a blessing? Was that
A blessing, because had it not happened, my eyes never would have been opened, ever. Had that not happened, had that situation never happened, yeah, I would have lost my wife. I would have lost my kids. I never would have regained my friendship, from years ago with all my friends, because I was just buying my own, you know?
Yeah.
So it forced me to reinvent myself. If it hadn't happened, I'd probably be dead now, you know?
Wow, man. And it's you know, in this life, it's amazing what talking to yourself in that narrative and just saying, well, I'm doing it for the job. I'm doing it
Right.
for the job. And then it's like, man, where that guy that you know, and with what you do, you know, it's like it really is. It's like you got to be the role. You got to be the role. But then,
Well, we're type A personalities,
yeah,
right? So we're going to go in headstrong, right? And dive right in. But there's always a price to pay.
yeah, yeah,
There's always a price to pay,
yeah, yeah,
you know? And I always say, it's funny you say about the excuse. It'd be so easy for me to say, like when I wrote the book, that, you know, all my actions and what happened to me was a result of, you know, working undercover for all those years. But man, you got to look in the mirror, man. You make your own decisions and you live with them. And so I look in the mirror and I say, you know whose fault it is? That guy right there.
mhm,
You
mhm,
know, that guy
mhm.
made the bad decisions.
And both things can be true. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
but look at what you did. You know, 1,000 guns off the. You know, it's like look at the career, look at the relationships, look at the, you know, on the front lines of this thing. You know,
Yeah.
and again, man, like just God bless that you can look at it now and look at this sort of like crisis that came in and realize that it was probably the opportunity of your life, and it
Yeah.
saved you, saved your family. You know, and
You know, that psychiatrist told me, she said, you know, with all the betrayal, you know, over these past 2 decades that you've experienced, she said, if there wasn't something wrong with you, I'd be worried.
nay,
Yeah.
yeah,
You know, but again, I never use any of that as an excuse, man. I made my own decisions.
sure,
And, but you can certainly see, like you're saying, you know, why you went down a certain path based on what was going on. You know, would
yeah.
all that happened if I had stayed at the bank? Probably not, man.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, I
yeah.
don't,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, right. Right. And
Yeah.
and so what now, man? Like what are your goals now? Like what do you want now? What gets you up in the morning? What makes you happy? What are you looking forward to?
So the book has brought me so many great opportunities. It's gotten me on the speaking circuit, and I got to thank Steve Murphy and Javier Pena, the DEA Narcos guys,
Yeah.
the two awesome legends who brought down Pablo Escobar, because you know, they kind of been my godfathers in this speaking business and gotten me in, and I'm able to go around at these law enforcement conferences and I tell my story, and I love doing it, and I love looking out at these faces, at these cops, because I can see the stress on their faces, right? I see it in their eyes, and I tell them that the most important thing, right, to keep, because what we do as law enforcement, as cops, we always put the job first. The job's before our health, it's before our families. We always put it first. I say, just do this for me. The most important thing in your career is your pension. That's the most important thing, right? We're lucky because we're one of the last professions that still have a pension, right? And you have to live a long, healthy life after you retire because you've earned that pension.
Okay.
Now make the government pay you that, right? So your goal, and I always tell them this, is to get paid longer than you worked, right?
Hmm.
I worked for 26 years. My goal is to get that pension for 27 years,
I love it.
you know? So take care of yourself, man. I know what you're doing is so important right now. And that case you're on right now is so important. Step back. It's not that important. Look who's around you when you go home. That's what's important.
Yeah.
Those people you take for granted, right? The family, friends that you're taking for granted, that's what's most important. Look at who's around you. Tell them you love them. Give them a kiss. Think about your pension.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
beautiful. Yeah. You mentioned when you first walked in about Mel. And you know, Mel's obviously an important person in both of our lives. But just tell a little bit about Mel Chancey and how he came into your life.
So Mel Chancey, and it's kind of funny because, you know, I started to tell you that there was that old cartoon I used to watch when I was a kid with the sheepdog and a wolf, and they were like mortal enemies, right? And all day they're battling back and forth because the wolf's trying to get the sheepdog's protecting the sheep, and then at the end of the day they would clock out with their time cards and exchange pleasantries and walk away with their lunch boxes, right? Because they were okay, and that's
Yeah.
kind of like, you know, ATF agents and outlaw bikers are mortal enemies, right? I mean, they hate us, we hate them, right? our goal is to lock them up in prison for the rest of their life, right? And so it's kind of ironic and funny that Mel Chancey, who was an outlaw biker, has become such a huge part of my life.
Hmm.
You know, Mel has held my kids, and my wife loves him, and he's a
How can you not? Right?
part of my family, right?
Yeah,
How can you not? So he was brought into my life by one of my best friends and my mentor, Chris Bayless, and Chris, ironically, went undercover with the ultimate goal of locking Mel up.
Yeah.
Chris went undercover in a different chapter because he didn't want to be in Mel's chapter because they had grown up in a very kind of close to each other.
Yeah.
So he was worried about a little cross contamination there, possibly. Sure. And ultimately, Mel faced RICO charges.
Yeah.
So in a weird kind of twist, Chrisser and Mel became friends.
Yeah.
Now, Mel went to prison.
Yeah.
And Chrisser ended up looking after Mel's mom, who's one of the sweetest ladies I've ever met in my life, while Mel was in prison, and staying in touch with him. And, when Mel got out, there was a friendship there.
Yeah.
And so when Mel got out, Chrisser told me, I want you to meet this guy. And all I knew was Chrisser vouched for him.
Yeah.
That's all I needed to know, right? Because that's good enough for me.
Right.
And so he took me over to his house, met his old Italian mom. The whole scene was just kind of funny.
Yeah.
And this was huge, Mel. I mean, he was the thickest man I've ever met.
And you knew his
life.
reputation.
Oh,
obviously.
Yeah. Everyone.
What was Mel's reputation? I mean, Mel was
the scariest outlaw biker who had ever roamed the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Mel Chancey was feared. Mel lived a brutal existence, violence, and he was the real deal, and everyone knew of him and knew he was not to be taken lightly, not to be messed with. This Mel we know now is not, I call him good Mel.
Yeah.
Bad Mel was a whole different person.
Yeah.
And so, I of course knew of him, and Chrisser had filled me in on everything.
Yeah.
And when I met this guy, this was not what I expected.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
This was this engaging neighborhood guy.
Yeah, yeah. But do you think that, man, because again, you've experienced, it's like you've been around, it's a big thing we always talk about on this show. It's like, unless you've been in the valley, you really can't know the mountaintops, right? Like,
for sure.
And it's like, you sure as can't help people. Like, you can't, unless you've been down there, like you really can't reach down and pull others out. And it's just like, it keeps on happening. It's like guys like you, guys like Mel, it's like guys, he's really been there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now it's like devoting his life to helping others and spreading joy, you know what I mean?
And one thing that's easy to forget about Mel, because his outlook is so good on life. Mel did a lot of time in prison.
Yeah.
Between state and federal prison, Mel's done a lot of time in prison.
Yeah, and hard time.
Hard time. Yeah, because, Mel was in it. They weren't putting Mel Chancey in a minimum security. Right. Mel was at the maxes.
Right.
And with the worst of the worst.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but I can't imagine spending one night in jail.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this dude has spent, imagine, years and years and years in prison. Like, how he could have such a positive outlook on life is one of the most amazing things about him to me. So I was introduced to him, and he was like every guy I grew up with, man. He was a neighborhood guy, right? I could have been Mel Chancey, right? You could have been Mel Chancey, right? He's another guy who got caught up in it.
Yep.
He got caught up in it.
Yep.
And he was very good at it.
Yeah.
And he rose to the highest levels of his profession.
Yep, that's right.
And we just developed the same bond that he and Chrisser had, I developed with him.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And the funny thing was, he knew of the crew that I was working when I was in Chicago. He had dealt with those guys, and he knew of those guys. And we just bonded right away. He came to my house. Like I said, he's held my kids. I've been to his house. And I saw in Mel, like not just the incredible story of redemption, but I saw this light in this guy. I was like, man, if this guy who spent like easily a quarter of his life behind bars in prison, and the rest of it, in this incredibly violent world, if he can see the sunshine through the clouds, so can I.
It's inspiring.
Actually, he has been a huge inspiration to me, man.
Yeah.
A convicted felon head of a motorcycle gang, outlaw biker.
Yeah.
And he's been one of the biggest inspirations in the latter part of my life, man.
Oh, that's beautiful, man.
Crazy.
Yeah, that's
I
beautiful.
mean, I love him, man.
That's beautiful. Bro, I appreciate this, man. You got anything for me? You got anything?
I mean, my son thinks that your show is the coolest show in the world, man.
he wrote on the
He'd want
on
me
the
to
book,
say,
your son, my son thinks you're cooler than me. It's like, what the
yeah,
it's stupid.
yeah, but no, I'm white, bro.
Yeah,
I'm white,
man. I really appreciate this, bro.
That was awesome, my brother. It was awesome.